welcome back to another edition of Conversations with History. My name is Greg Norman, your host. We are talking with Bob Stevenson, who is an inductee into the Michigan High School Lacrosse Coaches Association. Bob, you're also a member of the USL Michigan Chapter Hall of Fame. And we've been doing interviews with some of the Hall of Fame members. We're kind of catching up. You were inducted several years ago, now living in Colorado, which is where we're calling and talking with you from outside of Steamboat. So first of all, thank you for sitting down and talking with us. Appreciate the time.
My pleasure.
Bob, the easiest thing to start is start at the beginning. What was your first recollection of lacrosse?
Well, interesting. I went to high school in Detroit, Detroit Osborne Public School League, and I played track, basketball, and football. And at one point, the year was probably 1968. Our coaches had some tickets to what was a box lacrosse game at Olympia. And I'd never seen lacrosse played. I was on the verge of going to college at Michigan State. And I watched this lacrosse game. And it wasn't just that I thought it was a cool game, but I said, that game was made for me, and I was made for that game, because with my background and good high school coaching in basketball and football and track, I knew that I had the skills for lacrosse. So I just needed to learn to throw and catch. They had a lacrosse team at Michigan State, and I played on the last, well, what we thought was the last club team in 1969. And then I played on the first three varsity teams, 70, 71, and 72. I coached the 73 team and would have just kept coaching. But one thing led to another. I got a scholarship to U of M Law School, couldn't turn that down, and that ended my coaching career for the time being.
Where'd you play? What position?
I played midfield and attack primarily. Stepped in goal now and then, wasn't really a good goalie. Played some long stick midi and a little close defense, but really midfield and attack were my things.
Who was the first coach at Michigan State that you played for?
Turf Kaufman, and Turf is also in the U.S. Lacrosse Michigan Hall of Fame, deservedly so. I think Turf had played and experienced lacrosse in the Philadelphia area, so he kind of knew what he was doing. But his amazing contribution was getting Michigan State to make lacrosse a varsity sport.
That's a huge deal.
It was a big deal. So he was the first varsity coach at State for a couple of years.
Where'd you guys play? Where was your home field?
So we moved around. I loved Old College Field, which is just kind of to the north of Jennison Fieldhouse.
Right.
That's the way college athletics should be, especially for a sport like lacrosse. We played some games in what is now sort of a football practice field east of Case Hall, and we played some games in Spartan Stadium. The games in Spartan Stadium were nice because we were playing on what was called tartan turf, I believe.
Right.
And the old Adidas Superstar basketball shoes were amazing on that surface. You could be so fast, so accurate with your cuts. No need for cleats. That was a beautiful surface.
By today's standards, I'm thinking if you're trying to make a comparison, if you're not sure, it was basically field hockey turf now, which is
correct.
If you fall on it, God help you, because
right.
It's not very forgiving.
Yeah, we would be septic immediately when we would take a fall on that, but the surface was pretty near worth it.
Yeah. How good was Michigan State? We know that under Rich, they later got they went to the NCAAs and the rest of it. How good were you guys in the beginning?
Well, not bad. Um, so in our first varsity, well, first of all, when state was a club, it was large and in charge. I think it's fair to say that Michigan State in the 60s was the preeminent club team in the Midwest. They pretty much expected to win most games. When we went varsity, we of course lost a lot of experienced hands. That first year, we went 1-9. Our only victory was against a Notre Dame varsity team. And, I was able to put a goal in there. A couple other guys who were young did. And, we needed every goal because it was, I forget, 9-8 was the score or something. But so we had a 1-9 record that year. Teams like Ohio State, Kenyon, Denison, Bowling Green, the U of M club would beat the crap out of us because they had all of their grad students. And they had Bob DiGiovanni, who was really a fabulous player. That guy was a great goalie, and he was a great attack man. So, yeah, at first, it was a tough transition to varsity. But, we got better and better. And in my senior year, it was my great pleasure, one of the two top team athletic experiences I've had, to put in the winning goal against the University of Michigan. It took us, we used to play them twice a year, and we'd lose twice a year until 1972, last chance, and we got them. So that was nice. We came better and better. Ohio State was a more established varsity program, but when I coached, we finally beat them. And that was kind of fulfilling because in real time during the game, I saw a play that would work involving Val Washington, our, all Midwest midfielder.
Big Ten
And
football.
yeah, amazing player. And, Val and some other guys were able to capitalize on it, and we beat Ohio State. That was kind of a big deal. But I'd say MSU varsity lacrosse had a pretty steady up curve. And I don't think it stumbled ever. It started out lean. And then, certainly Rich Kimball took it to a couple of NCAA tournaments.
It's also important to point out in the early days that Division III teams were almost on par with a lot of Division I programs. And that's a conversation we've had both on Michigan Lacrosse Review and this show, is that in these conversations is that sometimes it's hard to understand why Division III and Division I would be the same. Now, with Division II sort of coming out of nowhere the last 10 years, that's really changed the landscape. There's still Division III programs that are competitive. But in those days, you also played, in some cases, adult teams, post intercollegiate programs from Chicago and other communities, and because they had those things too, because there wasn't as much lacrosse in those days as there is now. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. You had to be creative to get games, and I think it must be said that everyone has their experiences in their time. I like the time that I spent in lacrosse. I should have brought it up here. It's just 8 steps away. I played my entire college career with a wooden stick, all wood. We used to send a guy, Fred Hartman, would go out east to the Native American reservations in upstate New York, and he would come back with a trunk full of sticks. And part of the reason I like the era in which I played, I think it was very collegial. We would get together with the guys from U of M a couple times every summer and play pickup games, and then, go have a barbecue and a few beers, whatever. Back in the day, we made a point of, not just when we had a home game, it wasn't just a home game in word, but in deed. We would treat the visiting team as many ways as we could. And when I coached high school at Pioneer, I carried that tradition there. Parents always bring snacks for the game and whatever. We would bring snacks for the visiting team, because to me, that's part of what lacrosse is about, is the collegial nature that I think should pervade the sport and generally does.
What's your undergraduate degree from Michigan State?
It was, let me think. Let's see, I was an English major with history and French minors. And when I graduated, I was the senior athlete with the highest grade point average. And the whole team, the lacrosse team, was pretty proud of that, because we were just starting out,
Did you know you were headed for law school?
Not one bit.
So, all right.
Surprised me.
So if you weren't thinking about law, was it with an English degree, you're gonna be a teacher? Was that the direction?
That's pretty much it. I grabbed a teaching certificate, but about the time I did that, some of my buddies were taking the LSAT. So I was like, okay, I'll take the LSAT. And I got a good score. And, I had a good GPA and background. And I got admitted to U of M, but I wanted to continue coaching at State. But then they threw in a scholarship. And at a certain point, you need to take yes for an answer.
So law school test to get in was just sort of one of those things you did. There was no thought process at that point of being a career lawyer?
Zero. My buddies were taking the test. I took the test. But, after a while, it sort of became clear that this was a good way to monetize an English undergraduate degree.
Probably so. You got through. So obviously, what is your, all right, you went to law school at Michigan. What discipline, because I honestly don't know, what discipline of law did you practice most of your career?
So I practice a branch of law that very few people do. It's pensions and employee benefits.
Okay.
And it's regulated by a law called ERISA, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. And that law became effective when I graduated from law school. And I joined a corporate law firm in Detroit, Hill Lewis, and they needed someone to wrestle with this new and pervasive law. And they asked me if I'd do it. And I figured, hey, you're writing my check. I'll do whatever you say. And one thing led to another. And I became a partner in that firm. But then I formed my own boutique ERISA firm, which was one of the first in the nation. And, we became a pretty big force in that field. We represented a lot of, Fortune 500 companies. And then as sort of an exit strategy, we merged into Butzel Long in 2015. And I've definitely been in Steamboat ever since, skiing, biking, hiking.
Okay. So the law career, I'm from my own curiosity, you're talking about monetizing how can I make my English degree more valuable? So a lot of this was just sort of calculated, right? Or was there a love of the law eventually?
Well, I think that this is kind of my philosophy. I think that if you can put yourself in the way of where good things can happen to you, or you can put yourself in a position where bad things can happen to you.
Okay.
And I don't think that you can necessarily plan out your future because the world is too unpredictable, witness COVID. But I think what you can do is you can keep putting yourself in a position where it's more likely that something good is going to slam into you than something bad. And I've tried to put myself into that good spot. And so, I went to law school. I did this ERISA stuff. I formed my own firm. I just think, you put yourself in a good spot and good things are more likely to happen. And, my law career enabled me to officiate lacrosse while I was practicing, to coach at, both genders, pretty much every level from little kids to college. And, that was a really super experience that I think it would be a big gap in my life were it not for that.
Yeah.
So, I'm pretty grateful that the law career enabled that kind of thing.
Vocation and avocation, at least in terms of its value to you, run very close knit very close together in that process because one gave you the opportunity to do the other.
Precisely. And you make an interesting point. For some people, their vocation is also their avocation.
Right.
It's all consuming, and good for them. I'm also in like the Pension Lawyers Hall of Fame. It's called the American College of Employee Benefits Council, and I was in the charter class. So I've had recognition, but even in our world, I mean, like I wasn't Gary Gate at Lacrosse, and in our world of pension lawyers, there are people, who are more amazing than I.
Right.
And I've kind of wondered throughout my life, beginning at high school, I always diversified. I mean, I always got really good academics. And then, I was pretty good at athletics and, had fun and, skied and played around and, whatever. And I've often wondered, hey, should I have like just honed in on fewer things or one thing? And, I don't know, there are those who do and those who don't. For me, I've always been more a smorgasbord kind of guy.
I would share that value with you in talking with kids today and, counseling the kids you coach. You're also having the conversation with seniors about, what's next. And I knew from the time I was 13 years old, I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a newspaper guy. Unfortunately, I grew up in a small town. I went to work for my small town weekly newspaper when I'm 14. By the time I'm 18, I had such a career opportunities of just learning the process. I never knew anything other than that. And I didn't want to be anything other than that. So sometimes if you're lucky enough to fall into those niches that make you happy, it's a cool thing. From looking backwards now, where was the first major step from a coaching standpoint for you? I think your first job was starting the Pioneer program, correct?
Well, I mean, strictly speaking, my first job was being the Michigan State varsity coach for men.
Okay.
So there was that.
How long were you the coach?
Pardon me?
Michigan State's men's coach. How long were you a coach?
Correct. Just the 73 campaign, and I was warming up for 74, and then this whole law school thing kind of got in the way.
So law school's finished, then it was Pioneer. Am I correct? Didn't you kind of start?
Many years later. So during and after law school, I officiated.
Okay.
There weren't many of us back then. I coached youth at various levels, worked with a great guy, Ray Machuro in Ann Arbor, to kind of juice up the youth, to create, I guess we could say, some rec league youth programs there. And we did what I thought was a smart thing. We had youth, grade school, early middle school, playing in the fall on weekends so that the high school kids could be their coaches and officials. So that worked out pretty well. And it really, I think, raised the feeder programs in Ann Arbor inestimably. So then I coached the Pioneer men's varsity team in the early 2000s.
Okay.
And then I coached the MSU women club team, and we had some real success there. We went to a couple national championships. We won our league, beating the U of M women to win the league championship. And that was really the other big team, I think, standout episode in my life, other than putting in the winning goal against the men many years before. And Marianne Mhslca was the coach of the U of M women at that time. And I just have so much respect for her. After we won that championship game, and, we had a couple minutes of going crazy and whatnot, I went over to Marianne and I thanked her for the way that her program had been an example and really pushed us and prodded us and nudged us and goaded us into finally beating them. I don't know if she really understood how heartfelt that was, but it was a special time. So, and then I've coached youth, even here in Steamboat, off and on. But I think I'm ready for other people to coach.
How many seasons have you coached overall?
Dozens. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Michigan State, your daughter is that one of the reasons you ended up taking the state job because your daughter played there?
Yeah, it was one of those things. You know how coaching transitions happen. They, they were parting ways with a coach, and they needed a coach. And I had taken some time to step back and dig into law a little harder, but felt I could do it. So yeah, my daughter Ruth was an all-league defender at MSU. And so I got to coach her in college for a couple years, which was cool experience. She was a coachable kid. And as I say, we went to a couple national championship tournaments. We finished, I think, each year ranked 8th nationally. And we did have that one league championship over U of M, which was a bit of an accomplishment because the league we were in, I forget the name of it, the WCLL or something. It was massive. It spanned from Iowa to Buffalo, from like Kentucky to somewhere, central Michigan. And I think there were like 100 teams in that league. So it was not a cakewalk.
Have been the current president. I'm the current president of the WCLL, and we have the most they've ever had in the league is about 65. But we go from West Virginia to St. Louis, and the Canadian border to Southern Kentucky, and so it's one of the interesting questions. I was like you. I've coached the Michigan State women's for 7 seasons. Talk to me a little bit about the transition from going from men to women. Did you just talk a little bit about that transition? Was it stark change? Now you had daughters, so maybe that helps a little bit.
So I think that made it easy peasy. I had these 2 daughters who were roughly the age of Ray Machuro's daughters. And Ray was a force for women's lacrosse youth in Ann Arbor. And, our kids would get together with their kids and Ray and and we would do pickup games. And, so I knew women's lacrosse. It wasn't a mystery to me. The thing that I think I took away from what's different about coaching men and women, this is my perception, shoot me if it's impolitic or wrong. I think that women are far more coachable from the viewpoint of technique, X's and O's, things like that. The guys, you need to beat them over the head with a 2x4 so many times for them to get the picture. But women, really coachable. But on the other hand, I think that I have seen sort of like internal drama be more problematic on women's teams than men. And so that's kind of a takeaway that I have in terms of, what's different. Other than that, lacrosse is just beautiful, whether it's men's or women's lacrosse. Didn't Gary Gait coach the Syracuse women's team? Does he still?
Still does.
Yeah, I mean, why not? It's such a beautiful game. And there's things I like more about the women's game and things I like more about the men's game.
I actually talked to Gary yesterday we just interviewed him for our companion show. And that was one of the questions I asked him. I said, you had this great career on the men's side and your daughter played, and why are you staying? And he says a lot of it has to do with proving some points, of being able to sort of have some transition. There's a lot of men have gone into women's lacrosse in the last 5, 6, 8 years, and not necessarily with great success from the women's standpoint. So all of a sudden we're the minority. And he kind of had that conversations. He says that we've had some very unique offenses and some things that we push the envelope as far as rules go. And he says we're always finding ourselves on the losing end of the stick from both USL and from the NCAA because, he says I sometimes think it's because I'm a man. And I don't know that I necessarily buy that theory, but he says he does it because he wants to win an NCAA championship. So it was an interesting conversation. But he said he's not sure he'll go back to coaching men because he enjoys the experience.
Well, good for him. I'm glad he's getting the experience, and it sounds like as with me, a daughter was sort of the gateway to getting into women's lacrosse.
I don't think anybody's coached both the men's and the women's team at Michigan State. I think you're the only one.
Well,
And
there'll be another crazy person come along.
what is, go back to the avocation about this. What is it that you spend all this time volunteering? Is there a tangible, other than just sort of the self-satisfaction? Is there something more than that? Is it the way you were raised by mom and dad that you sort of give back, or is it just, it's become part of your life? It's just something that you feel like you got to do.
So good question. I love lacrosse. I immersed myself in it as a student at MSU. And I think one thing, I think lacrosse has some special attributes. I'm not sure that basketball teams have a game and feel like there's fellowship going on too. And I'm pretty sure that basketball doesn't have the need to self-promote that lacrosse does. I think a lot of sports were born on third base and, didn't know it, but lacrosse was not born on third base. And I think that good lacrosse people have to give back to the game. And I have always enjoyed giving back to the game because every element of that has been just fun. Anything I did was as much as anything for my own fun. When I coached at Pioneer, the men, we, in the summers, I ran camps and this and that and the other, but on Wednesdays, we held a pickup game up at that field along Main Street.
Yep.
And parents would come, moms would come, dads would come, friends would come, little kids would come. Some of those little kids, in fact, one of them became at least all state at Skyline. Trying to remember her name. She was a little pipsqueak. We would have pickup games Wednesday evenings, and then we would all go out and get a burger.
The culture that you refer to between basketball, is it possible that if I think of the sport of lacrosse, I think of the Indians, I think of the spirituality, I think of all of the writings that we sort of look to, the Onondagan reservations. I'm not sure that basketball, I don't think I've ever had a conversation about Dr. Naismith in relationship to the sport. We play basketball, but we've had a lot of spiritual conversations about and I think the Indians, I think the Native Americans bring that to our sport. Is that the commonality in your mind?
Lacrosse has such an amazing history. Unlike any sport in North America, maybe that crazy thing that the people did in the Mayan cultures was similar, but little brother of war and all that. How many sports were like second, instead of having a war, let's have a lacrosse game to settle this dispute. That's a special sport. That said, let me make one thing clear. I feel like lacrosse people have to scramble and struggle and promote the game. But I'm not a hater of any sport. In fact, I just use basketball as an example. But, to be frank, I think that basketball is the ultimate expression of team sport. I think it is the purest, best expression of team sport that exists because there's only 5 people. It's my 5 against your 5. Brains are important. Athleticism is important. Being on the same page is so important. And so I do think that, and let me say this, it's easy to move a basketball around. Dribbling is a hassle, but the same way that we can pass a lacrosse ball with great facility, you can pass a basketball so many ways. So these 5 people playing basketball, they can engage with one another effectively, efficiently. And so I do think that basketball is the ultimate expression of team sport. What do you think is the ultimate expression of team sport?
That's it's such a wide open question because I can think of the sports I'm involved in. There's rituals to all of them. The inside baseball aspects. I think of ski racing and passing of flags and some of the ceremonial processes that we've brought back from Europe and some of those things. I think they all have them. But I think is special about lacrosse is, the word in having a conversation with Lars Tiffany a couple of weeks ago, we were actually talking about spirituality as it might be religious. And the part about lacrosse, I think, is because of the historical nature that the natives bring to the sport and the way they still go about their process. I think it just wears off on us, and I think that's something that's unique to the sport. And I think that culture of sharing. I think of women's lacrosse without boundaries, is what the Indians had in their process.
Right.
That's we've only put boundaries in because we have tracks to have to worry about. So I think we've kept the sport in historical value. And I think that's something there's the Stanley Cup, and it's the greatest. If you think of all the trophies, the Stanley Cup is still looked at as the greatest trophy ever. And it's not, it's it's number 4 in terms of the big 4 sports if you start to compare things. So I think tradition matters to us more than sometimes we want to admit.
Well, see, to me, like skiing, I live to ski. I ski 180 days a year sometimes. So, skiing's important, but I don't view skiing as a team sport. I never got track as a team sport, like, hey, I won the high jump today. Like, so we get points. There was not a team effort. What I'm getting at about basketball, and lacrosse has it too, no doubt. But in basketball, you've got 5 guys who are engaged 100% of the time. Baseball, you're the left fielder, you're looking at somebody in the stands, whatever. Can't do that in basketball. You're totally engaged. It's intense. And so that's why I think it's the ultimate team sport. I loved lacrosse, no doubt about it. And lacrosse was good for me because I had good basketball coaching in Detroit. And so I knew drive and dish, I knew give and go, I knew man up and man down offense and defense, I knew fast break, I knew fast break defense, I knew presses, I knew how to break a press. Lacrosse offense pretty much translates to basketball offense. Defense, kind of the same thing, and I knew how to hit from playing football.
Yeah, the John Danowski talks about when he went to Duke, having spent time with Mike Krzyzewski, just because of the intricacies of various kinds of defenses and footwork and all the rest of it goes with it. He said he learned more from Krzyzewski than he'd ever learned from any other coaches that he'd ever coached with, and it's not even the same sport. In Michigan, we've been playing the sport for 50 years. We look at ourselves as being sort of this new kid on the block, and I keep trying to point out to the guys here. Now, you were one of those guys, one of the originators, one of the original guys that was around. 50 years old is not old by, I guess, our ages, but 50-year-old is still old enough for a sport. We've been around a long time. And I've been trying to press the idea that we really can't call ourselves new anymore. We're still growing to some extent, not at the levels we were growing. But you've watched Michigan, and you've watched Michigan over the last 25 or 30 years. And any thoughts on its growth and its direction?
Meaning the state of?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just tickled pink. Part of my contribution to lacrosse was being president of the U.S. chapter of U.S. Lacrosse. And what I did was I turned that fall 7-on-7 tournament with the help of so many people, Clark Bell, Angie Ward, just all kinds of folks. We turned that into I think we had as many as 140 teams some years. It was insane.
It was.
And so that was cool. It was great to see such a crazy festival of lacrosse. And I liked that 7-on-7 thing because it was informal. Nobody had to be uptight about, hey, 1 loss record, or any of that. And then from that point, I saw so many towns getting lacrosse that I was like, get out of here. Like, your place name here has a lacrosse team. I love it. the girls from Mattawan High School used to drive all of 3 hours or more to get over to Pioneer to play the Pioneer women, and get their butts kicked. But after a while, Mattawan became pretty good.
Yeah. You used to have the Pioneer Sunday afternoon, and this happened under Darren Millman. It happened under, I think, started with you. There was always an invitational in the fall for high school teams, and they'd play full field, and it was sort of the end of fall ball for high school. This is a little bit prior to the MHSAA. They've since shut it down, but you'd look up, because when I was at St. Mary's, we would come over and play, and there would be 500, 600, 700 people watching, 7-on-7 between, you'd have 3 full fields going. And it was fun to watch. We tend to do less of that because travel's kind of sunk into the landscape, and everybody's got to play for those kinds of teams. But I think we're headed in the right direction. I think we're continually heading in the right direction. But what is it that you're obviously very busy, you're skiing, you're doing a variety of other things, and it's not that you miss lacrosse, but what is it that you still keep your ear to the ground as far as the stories and the conversations and kind of keep track of the sport?
I think you have to kind of, I've learned this the hard way from like being at Michigan State and dating a girl in Detroit. You can't do that. You've got to be where you are. And so I've kind of gotten into lacrosse in Steamboat Springs. I helped coach young girls. That was a lot of fun. And a lot of my friends have high school age kids. So I've been going to their lacrosse games for years and their tournaments and whatnot. We went, it's a year and a half ago, spring of 19. I went to a game at the Vail Mountain Academy, and we went in a flat out blizzard. They had to plow the turf field there, and there were ramparts of snow, some as high as 10 or 12 feet around that field. They were taking video from a snow rampart, but there was like a keyhole in this snow where you'd walk into the field, and the field was all green. And my friend Lisa Eck, who drove down to the game with me, she said, "Look, it's summer in there."
Yeah, no, it's true. Bob, I appreciate spending some time with us. We're trying to do these conversations. I think there are 47 members now in the Hall of Fame, and I think we've done about 32 or 3. We're trying to chronicle some of these things. So first of all, we appreciate all of the work that you've done over the years, certainly here in Michigan, and well-deserved of being in the Hall of Fame for the Coaches Association. One side point, if you're not familiar with Mike Edison of the band Savoy Brown, with your hair now, you would almost pass for his twin brother.
Fun. Yeah, it's kind of blue and purple. In fact, a friend of mine, Lizzie, actually suggested this to match this hat. And so it's been blue and purple for about 3 years, and it's been getting long for 4 years, which is not a coincidence from a political standpoint.
Okay. I would tell you that. So and I admire anybody from that standpoint. But Bob, it's just been a real pleasure talking to you, and I do appreciate your time.
Well, thanks for doing this, Greg. It's a real service. You said 50 years, and I was like, wait, am I even 50 years old? But it's crazy. I was playing lacrosse 51 years ago.
Yeah.
What?